Welcome to Board Certified, expert interview episodes about medical licensing exams and healthcare careers. I'm Tyler, founder of Achievable, and we offer affordable adaptive online prep courses for the USMLE Step 1, MCAT, PTCE, NPTE, and others. Each course contains everything you need to succeed, including comprehensive study guides, video lessons, thousands of practice questions powered by our memory enhancing algorithm, and full length practice exams. You can get a free trial of any course by going to achievable.me, and if you like it, be sure to use the code podcast to save 10%. Now let's get started. Today we've got Linda Abraham from Accepted, and Linda, I'd love if you could introduce yourself and your company.
Okay. As you said, my name is Linda Abraham. I'm the founder of Accepted. I'm also the co-founder of the Association of International Graduate Admissions Consultants and served as its first president. For Admissions Straight Talk, Accepted's podcast, I've interviewed, I don't know, maybe 100, close to 100 medical school admissions directors, and I've been a medical school admissions consultant since 1994.
Great. Yeah, and so today, you hinted at the quote that you used from your colleague was the fastest way to do medical school is slowly. And
That's
I'd love
right.
if you could tell me a little bit more about that. And then also, I think I'd love to talk about one of the most prominent ways to do that, which is either a gap year or a post-bac program.
Okay, so let's talk first about the post-bac programs and then we'll do the gap year. Post-bac programs have a few different flavors. There are informal post-bac programs and formal post-bac programs. And then there are also post-bac programs designed for academic enhancers, in other words, people who maybe struggled in the pre-med courses before applying and they don't have the grades that will get them in. And you also have post-bac programs, formal post-bac programs for career changers, people who were English majors their 4 years of college and maybe were, after college decided they wanted to go to medical school, or people who late in their college careers decided they wanted to go to medical school and couldn't get all the prerequisites in before they graduated. Now, you could theoretically do an informal do-it-yourself post-bac program for either group. In general, the formal program is, I think, generally more for the academic enhancer than the career changer. But you have both flavors in either the academic enhancer or the career changer post-bac program. So again, those are the different options in terms of the post-bac program. You also have specialized master's programs, which actually you get a master's degree from, and they are frequently very similar or taken together with first-year medical schools. And there also frequently is a linkage from these programs to a medical school, where if you maintain a certain GPA in these programs, you're either guaranteed an interview or you're guaranteed acceptance to a linked medical school. So those are the post-bac programs options. Gap years vary more. It can be, again, because you decided late in your medical school career that you want to go to medical school, so you have to take the pre-med prerequisites, or you have to get the clinical experience that we discussed in the last video, or the research experience, or the community service, to both confirm your decision to go to medical school and to prepare for medical school and show that you have the commitment medical schools want to see. The other reason for a gap year, which I think is generally underrated, is to have a saner undergraduate experience. In other words, if you start out as a freshman and you say, I want to be pre-med, I'm going to be a bio major, I'm going to have a 4.0 GPA, I'm going to get a great MCAT, I'm going to do the clinical, I'm going to do the research, I'm going to do the community service, you're not going to have a very fun college experience. You're not going to have a very broadening college experience. And your GPA may just take a hit because you can't quite do it all. Or your MCAT prep might take a hit. Preparing for the MCAT is like taking another class. So you might find, and also we discussed in the last video, that some of the things that help to distinguish you from your competition might be something that has nothing to do with medical school and preparation for medical school. Again, you may not have time for that. So it might be, as you quoted my colleague, Dr. Barry Rothman, the fastest way to medical school is slowly. It might be much better if in college you really focus on getting top grades. You maybe take some leadership positions, Perhaps you do your volunteering over the summer, at least for the clinical exposure. And then post college, you get a job in a clinical capacity, maybe part time or full time, and you get the other part time or full time capacity in a research capacity. And you can continue the community service going along. And at some point, yes, you will take the MCAT, but you won't be taking it while being a full time student and doing all this other stuff. So a gap year or two can enrich your college experience, better prepare you to apply to medical school, and keep your life a whole lot more sane while enhancing your chances of acceptance.
Yeah, and so it's interesting. It sounds like there isn't really a penalty or any negative connotation from taking this extra time.
No, as a matter of fact, I think the average age of matriculants to medical school is 24, and in some cases it's
Okay.
higher. So clearly, people are taking gap years or they're starting medical school in their late 20s. Other people change their mind.
And so it sounds like then, at a minimum, it gives you more time to do what you were going to do anyway, but also probably all the extra time, particularly once you finish undergrad, can really help you with strengthening your application. So what are the ways that a gap year can improve your application and like basically can make you better off than if you hadn't taken it?
If you don't have the components of a great application, and it takes a great application, the rejection rate is well over 50% to US MD programs. It allows you to analyze your strengths and weaknesses and work on the weaknesses, whether they're academic or they're experiential. And if you realize during medical school that trying to do it all while in college will result in a reduced GPA or a lower MCAT score, then you're just being smarter if you don't try and do it all. And you protect your GPA and you take the MCAT when you're really ready and you have the time to prepare for it.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like also it's that I think that there's even more to it than that, or at least I guess what I'm asking for is, are there ways, like, say, getting some really rock solid clinical experience or doing something like working in the Peace Corps, right, as a doctor, or something like that, where you would only have time to do it in a gap year and it can really
Right.
level
Well,
up
there
your
are things
application
like
over
that. I mean,
other
you can't work as
degrees.
a doctor until you're a doctor, but you can work in the Peace
Yeah.
Corps.
Sorry.
You
Yeah.
can work in AmeriCorps. You can become a med scribe, which means you work in a doctor's office and you're going to learn an enormous amount as a scribe. You can work as a phlebotomist in a hospital. You can work as a medical assistant in a doctor's office. The ways to get that medical experience are many and varied. And again, if you do that, you're also going to be showing the kind of commitment to the field that medical schools value.
I think it's just about kind of what should students be trying to accomplish. How do you avoid like a wasted gap year is like the other part of it. But I guess it's just not
Don't
doing the
sit on the
job that's
beach the
asked
whole
of
year.
Robins.
Uh,
Yeah.
use of the time. Of the time. Again, start by analyzing it. Okay, what are my weaknesses in terms of qualifying for medical school? What are my goals? Then, okay, you know what? I could get some more clinical exposure. So get a job, medical assistant, phlebotomist, whatever, go do it. I haven't really worked with the underserved. Soup kitchens need people to serve meals, to serve soup. Do it. There are ways you can do it. Shadowing opportunities can be hard to find. I acknowledge that. But there are other opportunities. If you volunteer or work in an ER, you're going to get an incredible exposure to medicine. And depending upon where the ER is located, you might end up working primarily with disadvantaged people. Well, there's ways to do it. But taking that gap year, in addition, as I mentioned, to making your college experience, I think, a little richer and perhaps your academic record a little better, will also allow you to get, I think, enhanced clinical exposure or research exposure or research exposure.
Yeah. Yeah, so far this has sounded like a no-brainer, like everyone should do this. But I'm curious if there are reasons not to do it, not to take a gap year or do a post-bac program.
I think the big reason is money. The cost of taking a gap year. There's an out-of-pocket cost if you take a formal post-bac program, in addition to the opportunity cost. So, and then there's just a feeling I think that many young people have, understandably, I want to start my life. I don't want to be in
Right.
school forever. But I think the applicant has to look at, again, what is feasible. Do they have a lot of
Mhm.
A credits? Then maybe they can take a slightly lower load as they go through college. Do they have to work and earn money while they're in college? If they do, then, be realistic. Don't plan on doing it all.
Mhm.
Do you have other interests that you want to continue pursuing? In my podcast, I've also interviewed several medical school students and grads, and the most common comment they made was they wished that as undergrads they had not been as focused on fulfilling med school requirements, because the stuff that they could have done in undergrad, they'll never be able to do later in life.
Yeah.
So again, I think the reasons not to take the gap year in terms of the financial incentive to plow through, it's there, provided you don't shoot yourself in the foot by taking a GPA hit and thereby making it much harder to get accepted entirely.
Do you feel like there's a risk if you don't take a gap year that there's like a greater risk of you maybe forgetting some of the things you learned in school that eventually will become relevant on the MCAT or potentially even the USMLE?
I think that is a risk, and the MCAT is valid depending upon the medical school, I think for 2 or 3 years. So, you have to time your MCAT in terms of when you think you're going to apply. In terms of the USMLE, I haven't read anything like that. I don't know. Might be a good question to ask some of your other guests who are more familiar with the USMLE than I am. But I think the big risks are the ones I laid out. There's also, I
Right.
think parents sometimes have a concern that if their kids stop going to school, they'll never return. That's, I think, much more common concern among parents of pre-meds than among pre-meds. But again, I would warn those parents, if you're supportive of your kids' pre-med ambition, don't push them to take more than they can do and thereby prevent them from getting into medical school because they have a low GPA or necessitating a post-bac program.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a nice segue is how do the parents like interact with sort of the gap year process? I feel like there's probably quite a lot of parents that don't understand the advantages of a gap year and maybe think that it's just, oh, you're just going to be messing around or taking a break and, you need to go become a doctor kind of thing.
There certainly is that segment of parents, but obviously you're talking about, I think, 50,000 applicants to medical school and maybe 35,000 applicants to DO schools. Um, and so they're not all of the same stripe. Parents,
Yeah, of course.
there is a segment of parents, though, and we've talked many times to applicants, and we'll say, maybe you should take a gap year. My parents really don't want me to. Parents really don't want me to. And they're usually concerned that their child will not go back to school. That's usually the chief concern. The second concern is usually the parents are at least partially supporting the child. And if the child is not in medical school or gainfully employed, it's another year that they're going to have to support the child. So I think and if this is the child's long stated goal, the parents want to help them achieve it. There might be a little bit of selfishness in there, but a lot of it is just parents wanting what's best for their child. And I don't think they really understand, as you said, the benefits of the gap year in the medical school application process. And there's one benefit I didn't mention earlier when we were talking about the benefits of the gap year, and that is maturity. People in their early 20s are maturing enormously, and medical schools know it. So if there's another year or two of life experience, work experience, makes them more attractive.
In that vein, do you think that there's any kind of advantage to doing something more off the beaten path, like I mentioned, Peace Corps, or maybe go work at a clinic in Italy or something? Or do you think that it's more just they're out there doing things that doesn't really need to be anything particularly different?
I think it depends, again, on what they've done in the past.
Okay.
If they've done their year abroad in Italy and they don't have much clinical experience, then frankly, they need to get clinical experience here. They need to exposure to American medicine. On
Hmm.
the other hand, if they have tons of clinical experience here and they have some Fulbright scholarship in Europe or Africa or Asia or wherever, and it's an opportunity to live abroad, that's tremendously enriching. So I think the starting point has to be the individual applicants' strengths and weaknesses and what they need to do to strengthen their application.
Great. And then what advice would you give to people that are considering this decision? Like, when do you need to figure out whether you're doing a gap year or not? And what advice do you have for the people that are thinking about it right now?
I don't think there's a specific time when you have to decide that. I think if you're thinking of medical school in your freshman year and you decide at that point that you're going to take a gap year because you want to do something, you want to be involved in student government or you have to work or whatever, okay, great. But let's say you go freshman, sophomore years and you realize you just don't have the time for all of it, then you can decide then. And of course, if you finish college and if you realize that the gap year, that your GPA is not what it should be, then you might at that point say, okay, I want to get my grades up for my junior and sophomore year. I may or may not need a post-bac program, but I want to really be focused on academics. And then I want to focus on the MCAT prep and get a great MCAT score. And so I'm going to do my clinical experience after I get that MCAT score, and I'm going to apply the summer after I graduate. So I'll actually have 2 gap years. None of these decisions have to be written in stone. But I think the applicant has to keep an eye on what's realistic. The art of the possible is a great art to practice. And what are the strengths and weaknesses in their background?
Yep. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, any other things that we haven't covered on these programs before we wrap up? I think we talked quite a lot about gap years. Is there anything else that you want to say about post-bac or specialized masters at all?
You asked also about who should take the post-bac programs. I indicated that you should take it if your grades are low, if you don't have the grades for medical school, or if you don't have the prerequisites. Every so often, I'll get a call from somebody or I'll see a post from somebody who basically has competitive stats and maybe has applied twice and hasn't gotten in. And is thinking, should I do a post-bac program? Well, in all likelihood, the grades aren't the issue and the MCAT isn't the issue. Maybe they didn't present themselves very well via their application, or maybe they interviewed poorly. Then get help with those parts of the application process where you're weak. Don't just run automatically to a post-bac program, which again can be fairly expensive if it's a formal one. We've dealt with many people who the problem wasn't what they've done, it's how they presented what they've done. So then you don't need a gap year and you don't need another gap year. You don't need a post-bac program. You need to work on how you're presenting yourself.
Yeah. All right, great. Thank you so much. This has been Board Certified, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Linda Abraham from Accepted. And Achievable has great online courses for the USMLE Step 1, MCAT, PTCE, and PTE, among others, and you can try them all out for free by going to achievable.me.